All right, Reggie, the front row report here. I'm joined today by Tom Keifer. How's it going?
Very well, my friend. How are you?
I'm well. Just enjoying a nice day. Weather's good, and everything is going well. So, how's everything going on your end of the world lately?
Good, man. I've been having a good time. You know, it's been fun to be out this year touring and supporting this new record, and life is good.
Awesome. Yeah, like you said, supporting the record The Way Life Goes, which is your first solo record, and it's a great piece of work, great piece of rock music, and just overall very well done.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. It took 9 years to make. It hasn't been an easy road the last few years. Tell me a little bit about what you've gone through getting this record out.
Well, I started thinking about a solo record in the mid-'90s and started writing for it because the whole music scene was changing and Cinderella was drifting apart. But I never actually started recording it until 2003 for one reason or another. And when I started to record it, I decided to produce it independently of a label because I just wanted to take my time with it. And I didn't realize I was going to take, the plan wasn't to take 10 years, but, that's, as the title says, that's the way life goes, right? So, it wasn't like straight in the studio hunched over a board for 10 years straight, I took a lot of breaks, and I produced it with my wife, Savannah, who also co-wrote a lot of songs on the record, and we had another co-producer who's a very good friend of ours here, Chuck Turner, who's a great producer and engineer. So, the three of us get along really well, so we just took our time, and the goal was to just, make a record that we were really proud of, and, next thing we know, we turned around, and it was like 9-10 years later, but one day I woke up and pressed play and realized that what was coming through the speakers is what I heard in my head 10 years ago. So sometimes that's always a challenge in the studio to translate that vision that you have in your head or that sound that you have in your head to come out of the speakers. So as simple as it may be, sometimes the simplest vision that you have is difficult to get to come through the speakers because you're trying to translate that through mix engineers who have lots of buttons and gadgets, and they're trying to put their 2 cents in. So the most challenging part was probably the mix process, because I was actually looking for a very simple, raw, dry, in-your-face mix, and it ended up getting a little too affected, and that's not what I was looking for. So it took a while to find that.
Do you think that like you said, you released this one independently, aside from working straight on with a major label. Do you think that,
Well, I produced it independently, but with the idea of shopping it, and we eventually did shop it when it was finished to a label for marketing and distribution, which we found a great independent label, Merivy, which is a great home for us, and they really believe in the record. I didn't want to be in the record business,
Yeah.
I wanted to take a finished record to someone who actually knows what they're doing, because that's not my forte. Mm-hmm. And Merivy is great. So,
do you think that, like you said, a lot of times it can be hard to translate what's in your head into the finished product? A lot of times an album will come out differently than what you originally envisioned. Do you think that working and producing it, independently helped, that process to work a lot better, as opposed to...
It certainly allows you to take as much time as you need. If you're signed to a label and they, traditionally you get a recording budget, and they're really controlling things at that point. Maybe not artistically, but they'll tell you when you're finished, because I always say when you're on their dime, you're on their time, and when you get to the end of the dime, they tell you your time's up. So, and that's the challenge of working with a label sometimes, and a lot of times they extend you, a little more. But in this day and age, that doesn't really happen, because the state of artist development and recording budgets these days is just smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's why I decided to do this without a label involved, so we could take our time. And being able to do that, we take your time. You can have, we took long objectivity breaks, during the 10 years it took to produce this record. I mean, sometimes I would just close out Pro Tools and go on tour with Cinderella for 3 months and not listen to a note. And come back and listen to everything really fresh and objective and be able to say, well, that's not really what I was hearing for this song. And never really, you don't really get afforded that opportunity when you're working on deadlines, release dates, and a fixed budget with a label. When we made the Cinderella records, it was a bit of amount of time. The only objectivity breaks we had were like we took Sundays off. You know, but other than that, we're working 6 days a week, and you know, you get to have that break on Sunday where you go have a good meal and maybe watch a movie or whatever, and then come back a day later and say, okay, do we have this right or not? Who knows? We're fried. So that was nice to be able to take the time to, you know, really step away from it for long periods of time, do something completely different, like go on the road, and then come back and listen to it and say, I like this, I hate this, let's cut this out, let's start over on this. This is great, we're going to leave that alone, you know, and you're really objective at that point. So that was a nice luxury to have, and obviously Pro Tools affords you that luxury. This is the first record I've made in Pro Tools, and you can, you know, you just hit save and close the session, and you can come back 3 years later, and it's exactly how it was.
Nice.
Which, you know, it wasn't like that back in the day when we were working on 2-inch tape and everything was analog. You'd have to come in and spend half the day doing what we called a recall, which was looking at Polaroid pictures of the board that you took and trying to put all the knobs back where they were, you know. So, you know, technology helps with being able to, you know, step away for long periods of time. And, you know, so it was a very different way to make a record, but it was cool. Yeah. I'm happy with the result.
Yeah, it turned out really well, and I would imagine that, you know, as you mentioned, when you're working on somebody's Diamond deadline, you're in there 6 days a week straight, like you were with Cinderella. With this record, you're able to really take your time. I imagine you don't get burned out as easily.
I wouldn't say that.
Maybe you get burned out in different ways.
Different way, yeah. It's definitely like a really work as intensely and hardly as we can, you know, that work hard, play hard saying, you know, and then it was just like, oh God, I gotta get out of here for like a fucking month. You know? So, not a lot of voice of reason, you know, when you're on your own. So.
Right. Yeah, and I caught you on that metal show earlier. I can't remember when it was. It showed last month, I think. It's been showing non-stop, that episode. What was it like taping that episode and hanging out with Eddie and Jim and Don and the rest of the guys and being on that show, taping that?
It was a blast, man. You know, I mean, I've known Eddie for a long time, and I really love Eddie. You know, he's a very good friend. He's just, in terms of, he's just a great guy, but, you know, even when you're on air on his radio show, which I've done a bunch of times, or even on that show, the metal show, it's, you know, he's just so easy to talk to, and he's so knowledgeable, and it's just an easy interview, you know, a fun interview. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that. We had a great time.
Yeah, it was really cool to see that, and that's probably one of my favorite shows on all of TV, just because it's, you know, it's
a popular show, man. It really is. That metal show is something that people really enjoy, and I think it really comes down to his passion for music and his knowledge of music. You know, I mean, most people I know who watch that show, they really love it. That's what they comment on. You know, is that he's just really passionate about music and knows really. It's interesting. You know, it's an interesting show because you learn a lot.
Yeah, definitely. You guys mentioned on there that you've had some vocal problems the last few years, the last 10 years or so. That kind of played a role in this record. And can you tell me a little bit about dealing with that and getting to where you are now, and just how you've learned to cope with that, being a vocalist and a singer?
Yeah, it's an unusual problem I have. It's not. You know, a lot of times singers, especially rock singers, will get something called nodes or something that's physically on your chords from wear and tear. You know, sometimes you can develop cysts, or, you know, and these things can be fixed with surgical intervention. And I'm not downplaying them because they're not a fun thing to have, but there's an end result which is generally a cure. Mine's a neurological condition, which is a partially paralyzed vocal cord, and there's not a medical cure for it. So I was told I would never sing again in the early '90s, and you know, I've long story short, because it's a very long story, and it's really has kind of been beaten into the ground. I think people are getting tired of hearing about it, but you know, I had to retrain my voice to sing, and fortunately, I was able to find a way to do that, and it's a constant maintenance every day. But I'm just glad I can still sing. So
yeah, and to be able to have a new album out that's fresh, new material, in the midst of dealing with this problem, it's got to feel really good, and it's got to give a different kind of feeling having something brand new out that you really put all of this work into. It's really a personal testament to everything that you've battled over the last 10, 15 years.
Well, yeah, it's a culmination of a lot of life. So that hence the title.
yeah, definitely. And musically on the record, I sensed a lot of different musical elements. I sensed a lot of bluesy elements, some rock, blues. It's not one specific sound that you get on this record. It sounds like you really put time into creating a very eclectic sound on this record.
Well, that's partly, or I guess, or probably entirely a result of the era that I grew up in the 70s, because all the bands and singers and songwriters and stuff that I admired growing up, and where I learned how to play guitar and write songs and sing, they were really all over the place. When you listen to the Stones, they did everything, from like country, like Wild Horses, to hard rock stuff, and everything in between. Stuff like Hot Stuff that's kind of like funky. They did it all. They covered just so much ground, and the same with Zeppelin. And I grew up on that kind of contrast in music, and so you are what you eat, right? So I guess that was my early schooling, and I've always liked that kind of contrast in music. So I've tried to carry that on.
Okay, cool. Now, the industry has really changed drastically, and it's always changing, always evolving, but I really think it's, the change from the record industry to what it is now, to touring, it's been a really huge change, and I think it's happened, in my mind, quickly. I could be wrong, but what has been the biggest difference you've noticed in touring nowadays from, maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s, to today? How is it different now? And how does it affect you?
I think, most of the touring I've done in recent years has been with Cinderella, so I'll speak to that, because what I'm doing with the solo record is more on a promotional level. We're playing, more underplays, and I'm building something new out there with that. So, I've done about 40 shows this year in support of it, so that it's difficult to speak from that standpoint, because it's a very different animal than what I'm used to. So I'll talk about with Cinderella. I don't know that it really has impacted us in a touring sense, and the reason is because we were developed, and we had the benefit of being brought up in a time where the industry hadn't really changed yet, and we had the benefit of Mercury Records pouring, tons of time, energy, and money into developing us as a band, and we still reap the benefits of that today. The fans that we got as a result, the fan base, and they're incredible, and that was built on our hard work, and but also the record company, Mercury, they put so much into developing us and marketing us. So, a band like Cinderella, we're able to go out and still tour, and have very successful tours even without new music, and we do very well, and I attribute that to how loyal and incredible our fans are. But that was all built for us back years ago before the industry had changed. So, we're still doing quite well. Unfortunately, I think for newer artists today who didn't have the benefit of that kind of foundation being built, because of how different the industry is, it's a lot harder for them. A lot harder for them. And that sucks, I mean, it really does. And there's, we could get into a million reasons why the industry has changed and why new artists don't have the opportunity, the same opportunities maybe, to be developed over a period of several records and really kind of build that foundation. And it's sad for them. I think there's probably a lot of really, really standout, talented songwriters and singers and bands out there that are not being afforded a lot of the opportunities, years ago. So they're trying to start in a touring world where there's just no foundation being built for them, And there are new opportunities for marketing, obviously, with social media and the internet and all, but that's a very crowded highway out there, And it's, as much as that feels like a great thing, it's exposure, and it's free exposure, and it's not really free. It's creating an environment out there where it's making way for piracy and up-and-coming artists not getting paid for their hard work and what they're doing and what they create, and even affecting mid-level artists, artists who have had a bit of success. It's still much more of a struggle for them, I think, than bands from that had a foundation built, years ago. So
yeah,
I feel lucky to have come up in the time that we did, and I worry about the environment that's being built now for new artists coming up. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, and with the internet now, everybody, anybody who has Pro Tools that can play an instrument thinks they can put out a record, and it's harder for new bands to really get the attention of somebody because there's so many new bands out there, and a lot of people now have trouble really paying attention to a new band sometimes because it's like, it's another new band out there. I wonder what they're talking about,
Yeah, and then what's happening at the same time is, I think it's great that there's this huge ocean and outlet, the internet and everything where anyone can put their music up, and there's, that's great. I'm all for that, People have a right to make music and express themselves, but that environment that's being created for people to be able to do that is also making way for the things that are creating problems to the industry. And the industry is, the industry traditionally, record companies and publishing companies are the people who kind of focus in and zero in and say, okay, there's a lot of talented people out there. There's one that's standing out of the crowd. We're going to take the time to develop them because we think they've written the soundtrack to a generation, or it's something very special. And I think that the opportunity for that guy out there to be recognized and maybe brought along by a company and have some help developing, I think those windows are closing quickly, and those opportunities are becoming less and less. So I'm all for everyone creating their art and putting it out there. I think that's a great aspect of what's going on, but it's also making way for the damage being done to the industry through piracy and stuff, where the outlets and the companies who would traditionally try and find those standouts and really develop them, they just can't afford to anymore.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay. So, and like you said, you came up in a time, in the 80s where the industry hadn't really changed, and you have that experience of being in a band who's really reached a very good level. And now with The Way Life Goes, you're coming back and debuting as a solo artist as well. What has been the biggest difference for you that you've noticed, coming with another debut record, but as a solo artist, as opposed to with a band?
The difference in what aspect? I'm not sure.
How is the process of debuting just as Tom Keifer as a solo artist, being able to write and put out a record and play shows just as a solo artist? How has it really differed as of a part of a band and as part of a group, to really have just your name on it?
Well, initially, just having my name on it felt weird. Because it's like, you're developing all this artwork, and suddenly it's not the name of a band that you're kind of hiding in. You're just part of a group. And suddenly, I'm seeing T-shirts like with my name on it real big, or the record has my name on it real big. And honestly, that was kind of weird. So I'm still getting used to it. I remember some of the guys on my crew walking around with crew jackets that had my name on it really big, and I was like, you don't really have to wear that, guys. So that was kind of strange, and trying to, I always loved the Cinderella, the backdrops that we had that had the logo, and now I'm on tour and we have a logo or a backdrop that's the record cover, and it's weird, it's my name. So it's something I'm still getting used to. That's probably the strangest aspect to me, to be honest. But other than that, I mean, breaking a record's breaking a record. As different as the industry is, we're all trying to, you release a record and you have high hopes for it, and you get out there and you try and, do everything you can to get it going. And I think the industry's changed, and all the outlets that we have to get out there and market or promote a record, or a lot of them are still the same. They may be a little more challenging than they used to be, but we're doing all the same things. We do press. The label's trying to work radio and get airplay, and I even did in-stores on this run, and we toured, and so it's kind of day to day doing all the same things. I'm not sure that I think a lot of the outlets for marketing have all become maybe less powerful because it's divided out there. There's so many more, so there's not any one outlet for promotion or marketing that holds the power. Say, like, back in the 80s, you had MTV and you had FM radio and you had a few kind of like big important publications, and that's pretty much how you marketed. And any one of those outlets was extremely powerful. Now there's so many outlets that I think it weakens all of them. So you got to try to take advantage of all of them to make up for it. So it's just a different dynamic, but we're doing all the same kinds of things. It's kind of like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Okay.
But it was interesting being on tour for this record. Down to even going and doing in-stores, Savannah and I, who produced the record with me, my wife, and wrote a lot of songs, we were like, wow, this is really doing all the same things we used to do. So it's cool, it's fun. It's brought back a lot of memories, because I haven't had a record out with new material for a long time. So
yeah, like I said, it's definitely, the best things take time, and you took a lot of time on this record, and it came out beautifully, I think. I've listened.
Well, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt here, but I just want to give you a heads up on the time, because I'm about 2 minutes from someone busting through on this line.
Yep.
For the next.
Yep. I just saw the time myself, and yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, just to finish, the album is great. Listened to it about 5 or 6 times through already. Absolutely love it. Terrific,
thank you.
Terrific job. Tom, thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, man. You have a great day.
You too. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.